So what are the practices of Kriya Yoga? What do they actually do? I get this question often. There's some theory about it, there's some mythology about it, and then there's what actually happens. Theoretically, whenever you practice Kriya Yoga, circulating life force through the spine, practicing some of the higher techniques as well, what's happening is that the life force moving through the chakras activates or burns away karmas. And what are karmas? The karmas are habits, tendencies, our attachments. And when we have a lot of attachments, when we're invested in something, when we're identified with something, then we make choices, we do things that are of an unconscious nature. We're not doing them because we're free, because we have a choice. We're doing them because we have these psychological conditionings automating us, you could say. So when you're practicing Kriya Yoga and you're circulating this life force through the spine, essentially what you're doing is bringing awareness to that part of the body, to that energy system, to that part of consciousness. And whatever triggers are there, whatever karmas are there, get neutralized and dissolved. Now that can happen whether you're aware of it or not. Sometimes people can go through the process of Kriya meditation and feel extreme bliss, extreme peace, calmness. It's because these things are getting dealt with. Sometimes you can be alert and awake, meditating, going through the process, and an image will flash before your mind, or an idea, or an emotion will come up. And as long as you maintain your awareness in the higher chakras, and you continue to practice remaining centered as the witnessing presence is the self, every time those things arise and go away, you've dealt with a particular karma. I learned this from a Kriya teacher, again of a different lineage than the one that I spent most of my time with. And what I learned was that after you practice Kriya, the pranayama, after you practice it and you pull your awareness up to the higher brain centers, if then you rest with your awareness at the crown, all that you've worked through in that process, by holding your awareness at the crown or even the spiritual eye, all those karmas dissolve more easily. And again, things might come up for you, and you have to be decisive about it. So this isn't a passive path. This isn't a path where you just throw everything up to the gods and hope it falls in a good spot. It's about gaining conscious awareness of who you are and realizing that you are responsible for your states of consciousness. And in time, karmas can come and karmas can go, but you're able to remain centered as this witnessing presence in a state of peace and calm and poise. It's not really fascinating to many people to have that because it's not very dramatic. Most people are looking for drama. People are looking for amazing experiences. They read Autobiography of a Yogi and then they imagine that they're going to have these outlandish experiences like Yogananda had. Well, you've probably had some of those in your life. But that's rare, and it really depends on the individual. So you don't want to judge your progress in that regard. At the center that I used to be in charge of, one of the ministers there, actually there's only two of us, so the other minister there, mentioned how someone came to the center a few times, and the reason they didn't come anymore is because they came twice, and they said, well, you know, I'm just not having any, this is the second time I've been here, and I haven't had any visions yet. Well, the point isn't to have visions. And if you want to have visions, open your eyes. Look around. There's visions everywhere. The point of meditation is to experience that calm, clear state, to turn within, to exist in that state. And when you can do that, then you are free. And then whatever karma arises and falls, you can choose to interact with it or not. You must always remember that with the Kriya Yoga path, it doesn't turn you into a superhuman being where everything's perfect. The difference between normal people engaged in their unconscious and Kriya practitioners who have matured into the process is that life still happens to them, but how they react to it is different. How they perceive it is different. They understand what's going on, and these are things that are so hard to explain because it's very similar to imagine just imagine you know how to walk. So we know how to walk, right? Put one foot in front of the other, we walk down the road. There's physics involved in that, there's certain mechanics involved in that. We know how to do it. And that's what we do in our normal life situation. Now, when it comes to spiritual growth and maturity as a spiritual being, you still walk. So you're still in the process of interaction with the world. You're still walking normally. But now you start to exist in a little bit different structure, where you start to understand reality a little bit differently. So it's like going from walking on land to all of a sudden you are now under the ocean, or you're in the ocean. Well, when you're in the ocean, if you try to walk like you would on land, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to look like a fool. You're going to, flip around, do whatever. When you're in the ocean, you have to know how to swim. And to try to explain to someone who's walked their entire life that now you have to swim, and they've never been in water, they've never swam before, it's very different. But the more you practice, the deeper you go in the practice, you start to adjust. You start to see, okay, this is how the waters flow. This is what I need to do. This is how I need to move within this current state of consciousness. So as a person matures spiritually, their inner states require a little bit different methodology to function. They still need to do things like pay their bills, eat their vegetables, exercise. That's the walking aspect. That's what we're all used to. But now they're starting to see that their thoughts impact the people around them, that other people's thoughts impact them. They start to see that the people that they surround themselves with is very important, because we are all interconnected. We are all psychically interconnected, dynamically interconnected. So when you spend time with someone who's depressed or manipulative or has their own agenda, you get influenced by them. And you have to decide, am I going to maintain that relationship because it's worth it for me, even though I have this difficulty with them, or am I going to cut it off? And most people never engage the full process because they don't realize that there's more to it than just meditation in a particular style or technique. It's learning to pay attention to what's going on internally in your consciousness. It's learning to pay attention to how certain foods affect you, how certain forms of entertainment affect you, how certain people affect you. And you have to consciously decide, is it worth it to maintain these things in your life? And is it getting in the way of your deeper realizations? And this is a hard thing, because we can be so attached to a certain lifestyle or a certain way of thinking or a certain way of being that even if you make great progress in meditation, you'll still have this resistance to these certain things. So we always need to remember that with Kriya Yoga, while the meditation techniques do free us internally, free us karmically, in time we have to learn to function in a different kind of internal space that's less black and white, that has more subtlety to it. And the subtlety of the mind, the subtlety of consciousness, it's not necessarily comprehensible unless you explore it and see how it works. So the path needs to be, you need to be curious about it. If you have an insight or an aha moment, you don't want to just discard it. You want to think about it. You want to think, okay, how can I apply this? Because as you go, the more insights that come, when you apply them, they become real for you as a principle. For example, some people can have the idea that every time Mercury goes retrograde, well, communication is not going to work. Long distance travel is a bad idea. And all those things that come up, superstition. And as an astrologer, I get a lot of that. But when you start to realize that that is a form of conditioning, it's a silly example, but when you realize that's a form of conditioning and you start to rise above it, maybe the communication starts to go funky, or you're starting to have some trouble at the beginning of the day. But now you have the capacity to say, and mean it, and know it, that that's not going to happen. You just tell yourself, no, this is going to be a successful day. I'm going to have good communication with people today. You start to reinforce your own inner states without being dependent on this external conditioning. And it doesn't always work, because some conditioning is very strong and you might not be up to the task. But the more that you practice, the more intentional you are, the more you start to experience the subtleties of life through your practice, the stronger you become in consciousness, the more you realize that everything around you, within you, that you see, that you experience, is an aspect of your consciousness. And that way when you pray, you don't pray to be relieved of some suffering. You don't beg. You turn within, you become calm and clear. You recognize what you are as this one infinite consciousness of which everything is a manifestation. And then you decide in your consciousness, things are okay. And you affirm that and feel it and imagine it as this infinite consciousness all around you. And maybe things will work out better then. Maybe they won't. And if they won't, at least you know what you are. So keep in mind with this process that it's not about being a super human being. It's about knowing what you are at the core of your being, at the essence, that changeless, timeless aspect, which is not dramatic, is very boring if you're used to stimulation and visions, but in it is a deep peace, or it is a deep peace, a deep sense of clarity. And the more you identify with that, it starts to become as though you've woken up from a dream. That's why they use that metaphor. When you're in a dream, everything seems so real. And then when you wake up, it's gone. Where did it go? But you feel now that you know what you are. You're awake. You're in control again. Again, this whole thing isn't about control, but you are conscious. And as you start to wake up from these karmas, this bondage that you've imagined for yourself, you feel freer and happier. You no longer seek for visions. You no longer seek for external validation. The world itself becomes a beautiful place with all its light and all its dark, all its pain, all its happiness. And you see it for the tapestry of what it is. And that takes time. And the key is to first begin practicing meditation, which allows you to experience that witnessing consciousness. Engage in your life, again, consciously. Learning to let go of your attachments. Doesn't mean you don't enjoy things when they come. Doesn't mean that you don't dislike unpleasant things, but you're not attached to it. You realize it's the constant flux of life. It's whenever you hold on to something, whether it's good or bad, that the problems arise. If a bad thing comes up and you're pushing it away, you are resisting it, then you make a problem. If a good thing comes up and you're holding on to it and you don't want to let it go, you create a problem. Because there's going to be something else that's going to come around good later on. And if you're always holding on to the same thing, you're never going to experience the changes as they're meant to be experienced. So remember, the difference between an enlightened person, or the difference between a realized, self-realized person, and then typical, normal, unconscious person, is that life still happens. It's just that the self-realized, or the conscious person, knows that they are life. And they know what they are at the essence of their being, which means that they can meditate, or at a moment, they can turn within and experience that clarity and stillness. And they can come back out, and they can be in the world. People not engaged in developing their consciousness, they're always stuck in the dream. There's no way out, which is why the suffering is felt so much more strongly. So, anyway, the thought being that with the Kriya Yoga practice, it is a system, it is a method, it is a way, one way, to be at peace within yourself and to know what you are. In my mind, that's it. It's just to be at peace with yourself and to know what you are. If you have those two things, you have happiness, because the world is always going to change. This relative universe is always going to change, always going to be in flux. So don't think you're going to create a utopia or a divinely inspired heaven-like realm, because as they say in all the myths, even the gods fall from heaven eventually. So it's not about gods, it's not about myths, it's not about heaven-like realms, it's not about all these things that we imagine. It's about being at peace with yourself and knowing what you are. It's kind of fascinating. I was reading an article on how Kriya Yoga affects the nervous system in the brain. And what they discovered was that people who practiced for about 2 hours, so they hooked people up to brain scan or brain imaging things, and they had them practice for 2 hours, and they had some people not, and so they compared these two brain scans. What they found was people who practiced Kriya Yoga, they were simultaneously in an alpha brainwave pattern as well as a theta brainwave pattern. I'm pretty sure I got those two right. But anyway, the alpha brainwave pattern, that's when a person is alert. They're awake, they're functioning just like hopefully you're paying attention right now. Or when you're outside watching the birds, you're just engaged, you're not thinking about other things. They're alert, paying attention. But they're also in a theta state, which oftentimes occurs when a person is unconscious. And when you're alert, as well as in that theta state, well, then you have harmony between the conscious and the unconscious. And when you have harmony between the conscious and the unconscious, it's almost as if you are a fully aware. And when you practice Kriya Yoga, things from the unconscious can come up, like I mentioned earlier. But when you're alert and conscious, you can deal with them. Otherwise, you're getting pushed around by these unconscious forces and you don't know why. That's why people act weird. That's why you might be talking to someone and they act totally out of character for a bit of time because something unconscious in them was triggered. So it's really fascinating. I don't know if there are many studies on this. I've only found one or two. So if you know of more, I'd love to hear about them if you want to share them with me. But the idea that the conscious and the unconscious becomes harmonized seems like a good thing. Another book you might want to consider reading is called Buddha's Brain. I think it's on mindfulness meditation, but it talks about how contemplating certain things or meditating in certain ways activates certain aspects of the brain and how you can work with that for mental, emotional, and spiritual health. So anyway, it's good talk. Thanks for tuning in, and feel free to send me some more questions whenever you're ready.